that Wednesday was the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. We know it because of the words that were left behind, the words that have become known as the I Have a Dream speech. It's really only part of what Martin Luther King Jr. said that day. The story goes that Mahalia Jackson cried out, tell us about the dream, Martin. And then he put down his scripted notes and told us all about the dream. And we repeat those words, usually once a year. There are school contests, and kids memorize the words and try to be the best at saying these incredibly heightened words of the prophet-poet, the poet-prophet, the words that ring down to us from that time. And last week, Sam Rosen asked if maybe he and I could share those words with you someday. So I've adapted his idea. We're not going to hear all of it today, but we'll hear from 5 voices sharing those words.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal.
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed and all flesh shall see it together.
With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day.
We are a generous people. I love to stand here each Sunday and declare that. Our generosity can be seen in how we share with each other, share our gifts, not just our gifts of money to support the programs here, but the gifts of our hearts, the way we speak to one another, the way we care for one another when we're sick, the way we celebrate with one another. We are a generous people, and taking up an offering each week is only part of that generosity. And we are so grateful that all of you are here. This morning's offering will now be given and received. Please join me in a brief meditation. You may close your eyes, or if you'd like, close them slightly. Glancing down the bridge of your nose, finding a place to focus. A place to notice, a place to remember these words from Martin Luther King Jr. Noticing your breath, noticing how it is you sit in your chair, being fully present, being fully present to the poet-prophet's words, a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Harsh words to hear. Words that were said so long ago, and we wonder when, and we wonder how. And so we sit with the confusion or the ambivalence or the numbness of not knowing how or when. And maybe all we can do is sit and breathe and listen and know that as our heart beats, so does someone else's, so does that other. That other that we would judge, that other that we think is expendable, so their heart beats. So do they, breathing in and out, knowing we are connected to them. And maybe that's all that we can do. And maybe that's enough. To find it in ourselves, to have the compassion that changes who we are as a people of faith, as a nation. Maybe that's all we ever do, is deepen our own compassion. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's enough. Hearing these words again this morning, the words of a poet-prophet telling us how to live. Sitting with those words in our hearts, in our minds, in our bodies. Listening deeply, noticing how we are connected. Listening deeply together in the silence.
From Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? By Martin Luther King, Jr. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. America, the richest and most powerful nation in the world, can well lead the way in this revolution of values. There is nothing to prevent us from paying adequate wages to school teachers, social workers, and other servants of the public to ensure that we have the best available personnel in these positions, which are charged with the responsibility of guiding our future generations. There is nothing but a lack of social vision to prevent us from paying an adequate wage to every American citizen, whether he be a hospital worker, laundry worker, maid, or day laborer. There is nothing except short-sightedness to prevent us from guaranteeing an annual minimum and livable income for every American family. There is nothing except a tragic death wish to prevent us from reordering our priorities so that the pursuit of peace will take precedence over the pursuit of war. There is nothing to keep us from remolding a recalcitrant status quo with bruised hands until we have fashioned it into a brotherhood. From Behind the Kitchen Door by Saru Jayaraman, the Unitarian Universalist Association's common read for this church year. We don't usually think of food service workers as poor, if we think of them at all. I used to be a bad tipper. Even though I ate out frequently, I didn't understand what tipping really meant. Part of me resented the whole idea. Weren't servers being paid for their jobs? Why did I need to pay more than the price of my meal? Wasn't service part of that menu price? I worked hard for my money, and eating out was a guilty pleasure, so feeling compelled to leave something extra just didn't seem right. If I left $5 for a $40 meal, I felt good about myself. It took me years to understand how tipping really works. First, I learned that my $5 is shared by many different people. The waiter who takes my order, the runner who brings my food, and the bussers who clean my table and refill my breadbasket and my water. In some restaurants, the waiter has to ask the bartender to prepare the drinks, and a barback may assist. In the finest fine dining restaurants, a captain greets customers and oversees the service they receive. All those workers get a piece of my $5. Here's the worst part. The federal minimum wage for tipped workers is $2.13 an hour. That means the federal government permits restaurants nationwide to pay tipped workers an hourly wage of only $2.13, as long as the workers' tips make up the difference between $2.13 and the federal minimum wage of $7.25. If the tips do not cover the difference, the employer is supposed to pay it. Still, fair and equitable labor practices are extraordinarily rare in the restaurant industry.
Saru Jayaraman's life was changed forever because of 9/11, but not in the way we assume someone's life was changed in the aftermath of that tragedy. Her life was changed by a phone call from a union leader representing workers from Windows on the World, the luxury restaurant that had been at the top of the World Trade Center. 73 employees of Windows on the World lost their lives on September 11th, 2001. Many were immigrants. Most were low-wage kitchen workers preparing for a large breakfast party that morning. At the memorial service for their coworkers, former employees were promised by the restaurant owner that he would hire them when he opened his new restaurant. When he failed to keep his promise, Saru was contacted to advocate for the displaced workers. As a result, she co-founded the Restaurant Opportunity Center with one of the head waiters from Windows on the World. It didn't take long. A protest on opening night of the new restaurant led to publicity and a meeting with the owner. Most of the displaced workers were hired immediately. Saru had briefly glanced behind the kitchen door and discovered a world where workers' wages have been stagnant over the last 20 years, where undocumented workers are threatened with deportation if they complain about working conditions, and where lack of benefits keep sick employees showing up to work in even the highest priced restaurants in America. Yes, Saru Jayaraman's life was changed forever because of 9/11, but not in the way we'd expect someone's life to be changed in the aftermath of that tragedy. Her life was changed because after her quick victory with the Windows on the World workers, she decided to walk through a door to which she had never paid the slightest attention. She went behind that door, the kitchen door, and found a place where hard work is not rewarded, where workers aren't paid a living wage, a place where work could hardly be called sacred, where profit is worshipped and people are disregarded. We don't usually think of food service workers as poor, if we think of them at all. She writes in her book that she recently published about 11 years of advocacy work with the Restaurant Opportunity Center. She admits to being a bad tipper. That was before she understood that tips aren't just for the waiter we see taking our order and delivering our food to us. That was before she knew that the federal minimum wage for tipped workers is $2.13 an hour. She learned in her advocacy work that tips are often shared with bussers, bartenders, and hosts. She learned that if the tips your waiter receives don't make up the difference between the $2.13 an hour and the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, employers are supposed to make up the difference. Many do not. Many restaurant owners, even fast food restaurant company owners, are busy jumping on the bandwagon of the sustainability movement. Consumers are demanding organically grown produce, free-range poultry, and grass-fed cattle. Veganism has gained in popularity as more and more people become aware of how our food is grown and processed by the agricultural industrial complex. Saru Jayaraman believes, and this is a direct quote from her, that the food movement thus far has shown a much greater interest in assuring animal welfare than in protecting human rights. Most of us don't think of food service workers as poor. Most of us think of food service workers as young people saving money for college or working a summer job while they're going to high school. In actuality, many are parents, including single mothers. As California lawmakers consider a bill that will gradually increase the state minimum wage from $8 an hour to $10 an hour over 5 years, it is important to examine exactly who we think the minimum wage laws affect. Across industries, statistics show that here in California, of workers at or near the minimum wage, 12.5% are teenagers. 34.9% are in their 20s. And 52.6% are over 30. A clear majority are women. Last Thursday, fast food workers in 60 U.S. cities went on strike. They were demanding a living wage of $15 an hour. The workers want to be able to form unions without fearing retaliation from their employers so that they can bargain for those higher wages. And fast food companies, when they were responding, say, well, they don't have any responsibility for the workers because it's individual franchises that make employment decisions, including setting wages. In the Wall Street Journal on Thursday, the Conservative Employment Policies Institute ran a full-page ad with a picture of a robot making pancakes. warning that higher wages would mean fewer entry-level jobs and more automated alternatives. Others argue that the restaurant industry is one of the largest and fastest growing sectors of the US economy, and wages simply have not kept up with productivity and inflation. In the larger debate about the minimum wage, small business owners argue that they would have to charge more for their product, cut staff, or possibly lose their business entirely if they are forced to pay a higher minimum wage. Lost in all this arguing is the moral conviction found in our first principle: the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Or, as Buddhist writer and teacher Louis Richmond puts it, the ultimate solution to the inequities and failings of free market capitalism is not economic, but spiritual. In the end, it is our own deeply held beliefs and values that create the world in which we are all fated to live. The labor movement of the early 20th century was in response to the appalling conditions that were created by rapid industrialization. And the theological grounding for that labor movement could be found in the Christian social gospel, a movement that declared the gospel is an instrument for social justice. Now, while our liberal Protestant Christian brothers and sisters were examining the gospel in its social context, Unitarians and Universalists were gathering with the humanist movement and seeing some of the same social inequities that our Christian brothers and sisters saw. They responded in much the same way, but with a little different language. Many of you know that the first Humanist Manifesto was written in 1933, signed by both Unitarians and one Universalist. It was written as a religious response to scientific and economic realities that were disrupting outdated, deeply held beliefs and values. The beliefs and values established by religious humanism decry the profit-motivated order of that day in 1933. And this language directly from that manifesto: the goal of humanism is a free and universal society in which people voluntarily and intelligently cooperate for the common good. Humanists demand a shared life in a shared world. Now, we live in this world today where corporate CEOs of the 500 largest US companies make an average salary of $10.5 million. Raising the California minimum wage to $10 an hour brings a working mother with 2 children up to the federal poverty level. If it is our deeply held beliefs and values that are creating the world in which we live, then it is time again for people of faith to stand with the working poor and demand a shared life in a shared world. On August 28, 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. led the March on Washington for jobs and freedom. It was for economic justice as well. The march was organized by a group of civil rights, labor, and religious organizations, all working together because they understood that economic justice is inextricably intertwined with individual freedom. 50 years ago, Martin Luther King Jr. stood in the symbolic shadow of the great emancipator to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. 50 years later, the prophet the poet-prophet speaks to us from the past, asking us again, what are our deeply held beliefs and values in the fierce urgency of this now? Can we be the nation that leads the way in a revolution of values? Writing in his last book just before his assassination, King stated that there is nothing but a lack of social vision to prevent us from paying an adequate wage to every American citizen, whether he be a hospital worker, laundry worker, maid, or day laborer. There is nothing except short-sightedness to prevent us from guaranteeing an annual minimum and livable income for every American family. In the fierce urgency of this now, we face an ever-widening income inequality. After the economic crisis and the resulting recession of the last 5 years, it is as if we have all walked through a door that we hadn't paid much attention to before. The beliefs and values held behind the kitchen door, behind the boardroom door, and behind the politician's door are creating the world in which we are all fated to live. We stand in the fierce urgency of this now, looking behind doors that we have been passing by, doors that uncover our hidden beliefs and values such as some jobs are just worth more than others, which translates into some people are just worth more than others. There is a metaphor that Unitarian Universalists like to use to explain who we are as spiritual beings in this diverse religious world. It is a metaphor created by one of our leading theologians of the 20th century, Forrest Church. It is a metaphor that can be succinctly stated as one light, many windows. And so there is one light shining through the windows of this vast cathedral of the world, this one light of truth that gets sent through the windows of the various religious traditions, and then it's refracted in different ways. And that's a sermon in and of itself. Is there really just one light? I don't know. How does it get refracted? What I'm interested in that metaphor is the cathedral part. Seeing the world as a cathedral or a temple. When you see the world that way, you see it as sacred. It is viewed with reverence and awe. And when you see the world that way, you know that our economy of low wages and corporate greed does not belong in the cathedral of the world. Few of us can stand in this vast cathedral of the world and see our work as sacred, as holy. Most of us experience our work at best as mundane. At the other extreme, we view our work as the cause of all of that unhealthy stress that we must bear. Maybe some of us see our work as merely a means for providing us the ability to consume, to be able to afford to consume. Maybe some of us confuse our work with our identity, measuring our worth in dollars, in numbers of promotions, in our ability to own things. Standing in this vast cathedral, this world we create with our beliefs and values, standing and seeing the world as this vast cathedral, we can begin to see all work as sacred. As a people of faith, we can join in the revolution of values and reorder our priorities. We can stand with all people and demand a shared life in a shared world. The quote that was in the reading that Marjorie read from Martin Luther King Jr. is one of his most famous quotes, and there are so many. It's worth repeating on a day that we stand and remember what our president said to us yesterday, on a day where fast food workers went on strike on Thursday, on a day when we commemorated the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Now, that quote comes from a paragraph that's ending, and then the next paragraph, right after that very powerful statement, comes this whole long paragraph on how we have to lead the revolution of values. This providing a livable wage for all in our country. But before that, he talks about how the money is spent and how we are drifting towards spiritual death. In the days and the weeks and the months to come, we need to remember these words. We need to remember another quote that's been floating around this week, and I'm just really going to paraphrase it. But basically, it reminds us that the statues of last generation's prophets are built by the stones that were thrown at them. In other words, we build statues of our greatest prophets, and we no longer heed their words. Because when we heed their words, stones are thrown, because what they said means that we must respond in some way. What they said stirs up those stones. They weren't popular. He was not popular. He was assassinated. And we can't remember his words just by building statues. So in the days and the weeks and the months to come, as these decisions are made about how this nation leads with its beliefs and values, remember to live those words. Remember, while we sing again, I think it's important that we sing again, and this time I want to stand 168 in your gray hymnal.
We are the Conejo Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. Our mission is to nurture spiritually courageous people who transform the world through justice and compassion. Like us on Facebook, check out our website at CVUUF.org, or come visit us. See you soon!